The Rule of Two was established by Darth Bane. It is the reason why Darth Sidious sits where he sits now, Master of the Galaxy, Emperor of the Sith. It is the reason he selected only one apprentice to inherit his throne, or at least that's what he told them. Anakin Skywalker reforged as Darth Vader. Vader was no longer a man. He was a lion of the dark side, a weapon of fire and destruction born from hatred, clad in black. The corpse of Anakin Skywalker had burned away on Mustafar. In its place rose a force of unrelenting vengeance. He was the lion. But the Inquisitors, they were hyenas, scavengers, bottom feeders, a mockery of the Rule of Two. Bane would call their very existence a heresy. Yet, Sidious was never afraid to bend even the most sacred of philosophies. To Sidious, he was the Rule of Two, the culmination of its legacy. So as long as he reigned, it did not matter how many rules he bent, or how many broken Jedi he pressed into service. The Inquisitors were born to fulfill a purpose that was never truly Darth Vader's. They were meant to scour the galaxy for survivors, to extinguish Jedi remnants wherever they hid. Perhaps had Vader emerged from Mustafar whole, Sidious would have unleashed him to hunt them, but only for a brief crucible on his path towards a greater power. Yet when Obi-Wan Kenobi left him broken in the fire, Vader's entire being twisted into a singular obsession. What was meant to be a tool of training became a fixation. Vader no longer believed the Jedi were misguided, he hated them. And so while the Inquisitors existed to track and to torment, Vader himself descended upon the Jedi with the fury of a storm. As the years dragged on, the role of the Inquisitors became redundant, and worse, it offended Vader. Because as much as Vader despised the Jedi, in some ways, he despised the Inquisitors even more. They were half-fallen liars. They had turned not for ideology, but for survival. To Vader, this meant they touched only the weakest currents of the dark side. Vader was Sith. He was power. They were mockeries of both. Worse, they were knives pointed at his back, living reminders that Palpatine would never hesitate to surround his apprentice with rivals, and perhaps even replacements. Every time Vader looked at them, he saw the specters of Anakin's past. Jedi who once sat beside him in the temple, now wearing the masks of traitors, still whole in body where his had been shattered. His envy slowly sharpened into cruelty. The initiation into the Inquisitorius was pain. Vader maimed them all, taking eyes, limbs, and more. He sought to teach them that only through agony could they birth strength, the way that Mustafar had birthed him. And yet, even scarred, they refused to change. Because pain had been thrust upon them, they had not embraced it. They had not earned it. To Vader, this proved their weakness, and so he crushed them. He dominated them. He killed them when they failed, and when an Inquisitor died, no replacement was chosen. They were simply discarded as the Jedi threat dwindled. Pawns, broken tools, resources to be spent. And yet here lies the irony. For all of his hatred, the Inquisitors did serve Vader quite well. They flushed out Jedi from across the galaxy, rooting prey from their holes so that the lion could devour them. They fueled his rage, testing his blade in training duels, stoking the fire of his hate. Their presence proved that Sidious was always pushing him, always testing him, always reminding him that the Rule of Two had teeth even when bent. And in some small way, Vader's hatred for them became another whetstone, a reason to rise higher. Still, hatred was all they would ever receive. The Grand Inquisitor himself learned this when Vader bound his spirit eternally to an ancient High Republic Jedi outpost. The Inquisitor called it a fate worse than death. Trapped, enslaved, unable to die. It was Vader's final testament of loathing, a declaration that the Inquisitors were beneath him, worthy only of servitude, mockery, and torment. Perhaps even more than the Red Guards who stood at Sidious's side. Vader's hatred for the Inquisitors was pure, primal, and eternal. Palpatine had broken the Rule of Two, bent it when he created the Inquisitors. Vader knew this, twisting Sith tradition to ensure that Vader was never his true heir, but always a servant. The Inquisitors were living proof that the Emperor's will overrode even the oldest Sith traditions and laws, and that their presence was a constant reminder to Vader of his own chains. They were broken Jedi, reshaped into tools, shadows of what they once were, and to Vader they cheapened the dark side by existing outside of its purity. For all of their flaws, the Jedi had at least chosen their path, claimed their destiny with conviction. The Inquisitors had done neither. They were not conquerors or visionaries, but failures who cracked under the pressure and resigned themselves to obedience to a higher power. To Vader, they were mockeries of both the Jedi and the Sith, weak reflections that insulted the dark side and surrounded him daily with reminders of compromise and servitude. The Inquisitors failed Vader constantly, fumbling hunts, dying in ways that embarrassed the Empire, and exposing their weakness at every turn. Vader relished at any excuse to eliminate them, seeing their deaths as a kind of cleansing, proof that the dark side consumed the unworthy. Yet their very existence enraged him, because they were never his creation. They were Sidious's pets, leashed dogs that answered to the Emperor before they ever obeyed the Dark Lord. Every Inquisitor was proof that Vader was lesser. Palpatine could surround his apprentice with a dozen blades, and he could call it aid. In truth, it was the knife at Vader's throat, a reminder that he was watched, that he was not trusted, and that his master's hand guided every aspect of the Inquisitorius. To Vader, they were mockeries of the Sith's legacy, weak, broken servants who only highlighted the one truth that he could not escape, that he too was chained. But not every Inquisitor perished beneath Vader's shadow. In the EU, fragments of the Inquisitorius endured beyond both the fall of the Jedi and even beyond the fall of Darth Vader himself. The most striking example of this survival is the Dark Jedi that you will know well on this channel, Jarek. Jarek was a former Jedi Master, one who had defected during the Purge, becoming one of the most infamous Inquisitors and Dark Jedi in the entirety of the lore. He was different from his peers. He was less a broken scavenger and more a schemer with a real vision. Jarek carved out his own faction of Dark Jedi who served him loyally, a warband that stood outside of the Rule of Two, and survived as a splinter of the Imperial Darkness. What makes Jarek fascinating is not simply his survival in the New Republic era, but the scale of what he nearly achieved. His ambitions were centered on the Valley of the Jedi, an ancient Force nexus steeped in the energy of thousands of trapped souls. Legends tells us that had Jarek succeeded in harnessing that power, he could have reached a level of strength to rival Darth Vader. That claim is staggering. For all the mockery Vader poured upon the Inquisitors, for all of his scorn and contempt, here was one of their number who might have become his equal if fate had bent a different way. This reality nods directly to the legitimacy of some of Vader's fears. He distrusted the Inquisitors not only because they were weak, but because he understood that weakness, under the right dark side conditions, could be sharpened into something formidable. Vader's paranoia that one of them may one day threaten him is not entirely misplaced. In Jarek's case, the galaxy came perilously close to witnessing the Inquisitor ascending beyond Vader's contempt and standing among the greatest darkside users of the entire age. And Jarek was not alone. Several of his Dark Jedi followers trained in his shadow, outliving both Sidious and Vader. They were Scavengers, yes, but they proved that the Inquisitorius was not as temporary as Vader would have wished. Even in fragments, the Order persisted like an infection in the galaxy, a lingering strain of the Jedi Purge. This is one of the ironies of the Inquisitorius in Legends. While Vader loathed them as hyenas gnawing at the bones of his prey, some proved far more dangerous than he ever allowed himself to admit. Their survival showed that the dark side could bloom in unexpected places, even among those that he dismissed as weak. And in the end, the shadow of the Inquisitors extended beyond the life of Vader himself, proof that not every tool of Sidious was discarded when its purpose was fulfilled. But Vader is of course complex. For all of his contempt towards the Inquisitors, Vader found a certain satisfaction in their existence at points. They were an outlet for his sadism, pawns he could torment, mutilate, or discard whenever he wanted to, or whenever they failed him, which was quite often. Their constant fear of Vader reinforced his authority. They fed the terror that he projected across the Empire and across the stars themselves. Beyond that, they were at least useful tools in hunting the remnants of the Jedi. They flushed prey from hiding, bled out the survivors, and spared Vader from the indignity of chasing down every insignificant fugitive. Even if they never matched his standards, their hunts served his greater goal of eradicating the Jedi completely. Perhaps most importantly, the Inquisitors validated Vader's sense of superiority. Surrounding himself with their weakness, he could see the gulf between true power and its hollow imitation. They were broken Jedi who lacked conviction, shells who had bent but never transcended. Every failure, every embarrassing death, every moment of fear that displayed before Vader underscored the truth that Vader alone was strong enough to stand beside Sidious. The Inquisitors were mockeries of the dark side, yet in their mockery they gave Vader proof of his own supremacy, living reminders that he was more than them, that he was something that they would never become, a Sith. His power was not an imitation of the Jedi's, it was pure. Vader's hatred for the Inquisitors was as deep as the fire that birthed him. To him, they were scavengers, weak half-measures of the dark side who only cheapened his greater mission. And yet their survival in Legends, their usefulness in flushing out Jedi, and their potential to rise as figures like Jarek reveal another irony. Vader's scorn was not without merit. So what do you think? Were the Inquisitors doomed from the beginning, nothing more than fodder to stoke Vader's rage? Or were they the dark side's hidden heirs? A threat that might have surpassed even Vader under certain circumstances. In other words, were they truly hyenas, or lions waiting for their chance to strike? As always, lore junkies, we love diving into the philosophy of Darth Vader, how he interprets himself and his servants. So what do you think? What are your thoughts on Vader's relationship with the Inquisitors, and why he hated them so much? And as always, may the Force be with you, and have an amazing day.